My name is Claire Hadley. I'm 31 years old. And the first thing I want you to know is that I am not the kind of person who believes in things she can't explain. I'm a licensed home appraiser. I measure square footage. I calculate market value. I look at a house and I tell you what it's worth, down to the last decimal point. I am not dramatic. I am not paranoid. I do not invent things. I need you to know that before I tell you what happened with my dog. Because for almost 2 years, everyone I loved, my mother, my two brothers, my grandmother, the people I would have walked through fire for, they all told me I was losing my mind, that the stress was getting to me, that grief had broken something inside my head, that I needed to see someone, that Bo, my dog, my 4-year-old chocolate lab, the steadiest creature I have ever known, was just a dog, and dogs bark, and I was reading too much into it. And maybe I would have believed them. Maybe I would have kept swallowing that story and calling myself crazy if Bo hadn't kept standing at that door every single night. Same door, same time, same low, urgent sound from somewhere deep in his chest. And I want to tell you the whole thing, from the beginning, because stories like this one, they don't make sense unless you understand what came before, unless you understand the house and the family inside it, and the door at the end of the hallway that everyone agreed we never talked about. So let's start there. Before I tell you anything else, I want to say if you've ever had an animal try to show you something the rest of the world refused to see, subscribe to Pet Witness. Stories like this one are exactly why this channel exists. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because you are going to want to hear every word of this. I grew up in Harlan Falls, Kentucky, population 4,200, give or take, depending on the year. One main road called Depot Street, a Dollar General, a Dairy Freeze, a Catholic church with a broken bell that rang at the wrong times, and a Kroger where everybody knew your name and your business in that order. My mother is Denise Hadley. She's 58. She's worked the front desk at Harlan Falls Family Practice for 22 years. She knows every patient in that office, every medication, every condition, every family history. She knows more about the people in that town than most people know about themselves. My father, Dale, passed away when I was 26, pancreatic cancer, fast and terrible, gone in 4 months from diagnosis to burial. He was 54. He left behind a paid-off house on Sycamore Creek Road, a 2009 Ford pickup, a retirement account with about $94,000 in it, and a life insurance policy worth $150,000. He also left behind my mother, my brothers, Marcus, who is 35, and Tom, who is 29, and a storage room at the back of the house that he kept locked while he was alive, and that we had agreed, without ever actually discussing it, to leave alone after he was gone. I had a key to that room. He'd given it to me the week before he died. Not to Marcus, not to Tom, to me. He pressed it into my palm in the hospital room with his fingers that had gone thin and yellow, and he looked at me with the kind of look that has too many things inside it to be one look, and he said, "Don't open it until you need to." I didn't ask what that meant. I was 26 and my father was dying, and I didn't have room in my chest for any more questions. I put the key on my key ring between my car key and my apartment key, and I carried it for 4 years, and every time my thumb caught on it, I thought of him, and I did not open the room. Then Bo started barking. Bo came into my life 7 months after my father's funeral. A friend's dog had a litter, and they couldn't keep them all, and one Sunday afternoon in February, I drove out to their farm, and a 10-week-old chocolate lab walked directly to me across the kitchen floor and sat on my foot. That was it. That was the whole decision. He was the kind of dog who learned your moods before you did, who would push his head into your lap exactly when the sadness came, before you'd even registered you were sad, who slept at the foot of the bed every night without exception, who greeted you at the door the same way whether you'd been gone 5 minutes or 5 hours, tail working so hard his whole back half went with it, who looked at you with those amber eyes like you were the most important thing in any room. I moved back to Harlan Falls a year after my father died. My lease was up in Lexington, and mom was alone, and real estate was cheaper. And I told myself it was practical. It was practical. But mostly I was tired and sad, and I wanted to be somewhere that still had his handwriting on things. On the label maker in the garage, on the garden stakes in the backyard, on the inside cover of the Bible on the nightstand. Mom had a spare room, and Beau was good-natured and calm, and Mom had always tolerated dogs. So we moved in together, me and Beau, a 27-year-old woman and her lab, back in the house she grew up in. At first, it was fine, quiet, we had a routine. I drove to property assessments 5 days a week, sometimes farther out if the assignments took me to neighboring counties. Mom worked her 8 to 4 at the clinic. Tom lived 40 minutes away and came for Sunday dinners. Marcus lived in Nashville and called on birthdays. Beau and I walked the same 2-mile loop every morning at 7, down Sycamore Creek Road, through the cemetery, back up the hill past the dairy freeze. We had dinner together most nights. We watched television. We did not talk about my father much, because my mother's way of grieving was to not say the words, to fold the clothes and wash the dishes and keep the house the same way it had always been, as if the sameness could hold everything together. The storage room at the back of the hallway stayed locked. I had the key. Nobody asked about it. And life moved forward the way life does, one unremarkable day at a time, until the October after I moved back. The first night it happened, I thought it was an animal outside, a raccoon near the back fence maybe, or the neighbor's cat getting into the trash. It was 2:14 in the morning. I know because I looked at my phone when Beau woke me up. He wasn't barking at the window or the back door or any of the places dogs bark when they hear something outside. He was standing at the end of the upstairs hallway, facing the door to my father's storage room, and he was making a sound I hadn't heard from him before. Low, continuous, not frantic, not playful. The kind of sound that lives at the back of the throat and means something specific, something the dog cannot put into any other language. I got up. I called his name. He didn't look at me. He stayed at that door with his nose 2 inches from the wood, and that sound coming out of him like something mechanical, like a motor that doesn't stop. I stood there with him for a few minutes. I put my hand on his back. He was warm and solid, and his whole body was leaning slightly forward, toward the door. I told him it was nothing. I took him back to the bedroom. He went, reluctantly, and settled at the foot of the bed, and eventually went quiet, and I told myself a raccoon had been under the house. The next night, 2:06 in the morning, same hallway, same door, same sound. The night after that, 2:11. By the 4th night, I stopped telling myself it was raccoons. I mentioned it to my mother over breakfast. I kept it casual. I said Beau had been getting up at night and going to stand at the storage room door, and I wasn't sure why. She looked at me over her coffee cup. She has pale blue eyes, my mother, the kind that don't give much away. She said, "That room is full of old equipment and storage bins. He probably smells something in there. A mouse, maybe." "That's possible," I said. She went back to her coffee. The conversation was over. But the thing is, I know Beau. I have lived with him for 3 years at that point. I know what he sounds like when he smells a mouse. He sniffs, he whines, he paws at the baseboard. He does not stand motionless in a dark hallway at 2 in the morning, making a sound like a frequency test. I didn't push it with my mother. I told myself she was probably right. I let it go for 2 more weeks, during which Beau did it every single night. And I got up every single night and stood with him for a few minutes and then led him back to bed. Then I started to wonder, not about what was in the room, about why my father had given me the key. I called my brother Tom. He drove up from Bowling Green that Saturday, and we had coffee on the back porch, and I told him about Bo and the door. He listened with the patient face he makes when he's deciding how to respond. He said, "Claire, you have a dog that's been doing something weird for 3 weeks, and you're still thinking about it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "He probably hears something. Old house, pipes maybe, or something nesting in the walls." "Maybe," I said. "Also," he paused, picked up his mug. "I know you have Dad's key to that room. Mom mentioned it. I think you should just let that go." I looked at him. "What do you mean, let it go? It's just a key. I haven't even used it." "I know. I'm just saying." He drank his coffee. "Some things are better left alone." I didn't know what to do with that. It was too specific, too deliberate. You don't say some things are better left alone about a storage room unless you have a reason. I filed it away. The key was on my keyring. Bo stood at that door every night. A week later, I brought it up again at Sunday dinner. Me, Mom, Tom. Marcus on speakerphone because he'd been too busy to visit in 4 months. I said Bo had been at the storage room door every night for a month now, that it was starting to feel like something more than random behavior. My mother set down her fork. She looked at me, then she said it. "Claire, honey, I am worried about you. Not about the door, not about what might be inside, about me. You've been under a lot of stress. The move, the job change, living here again after what we all went through with your father." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "A dog barking in the night is not a mystery. It's a dog." Marcus said, from the phone, "She's right, Claire. You need to stop overthinking." Tom was quiet. I looked at my brothers sitting across that table. He knew something. I could see it in the way he wasn't looking at me. And that was the moment, that precise moment at the dinner table with the pork chops going cold and Bo sleeping in the hallway and my brother staring at his plate, that I understood I had been handed a problem that nobody in this family was going to help me solve. I want to stop here for a second because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, just open the room, Claire. And I would have, except the key disappeared from my keyring 3 days later. I noticed it on a Tuesday morning when I was leaving for a property assessment in Bell County. I stood by my car in the driveway with my keys in my hand and felt the absence of it the way you feel the gap where a tooth used to be. Just gone. The ring was intact, the other keys were there, only my father's key was missing. I went back inside. I checked my purse, my jacket pockets, the bowl by the door where one kept loose change. Nothing. I asked my mother if she'd seen an extra key anywhere. She said no without looking up from her crossword. I thought about saying more. I didn't. That night, I looked online and found a locksmith in Harlan Falls, a man named Dennis Ackley, who had been doing locks and keys in that town for 30 years. I called him. I asked him if he could pick an interior door lock without a key. He said yes. He said most residential interior locks weren't serious, and he could have it open in under 10 minutes. I booked an appointment for Thursday. Wednesday night, Bo stood at that door for an hour and 40 minutes. I timed it. I sat in the hallway with my back against the wall and my knees pulled up, and I watched him, and he didn't move. Just that low, low sound, his nose not quite touching the wood. I put my hand on his back. His muscles were tight, not fear, something focused, like a professional waiting for a door to open. "I know," I told him. "I know. Thursday." He didn't look at me. He kept watching the door. Thursday morning, my mother was at work by 8. I called Dennis at 8:15, and he was at the house by 9. He was a short man, maybe 65, wearing a khaki jacket with his name stitched on the pocket. He looked at the door for about 4 seconds, took 2 tools from his kit, and had the lock open in 6 minutes. He stepped back. The door swung inward. I want to be honest about what happened next, because this is the part that's hard to describe without sounding like a movie. I've been trying to figure out how to say it in a way that sounds real, and I think the truest thing I can say is this: nothing jumped out. The room did not smell like something terrible. There were no immediate answers. What there was filing cabinets. Four of them, old metal ones, olive green, the kind that used to be in every office in the 1980s. And banker's boxes stacked along the right wall, maybe 15 of them, and a folding table with a laptop on it, an older laptop but not ancient, and a small printer, and a stack of papers in the printer tray. And in the far corner, a floor safe, black, combination lock, about 2 feet tall. Beau walked in. He went directly to the filing cabinets, sniffed the base of each one, then sat down in the middle of the room and looked at me. I pulled the first drawer of the nearest cabinet. It took me 3 hours to understand what I was looking at. Financial records, mostly, but not my father's personal finances. These were records for something called Hadley Creek Holdings, LLC, a company I had never heard of, registered in 2007, 2 years before I left for college, while I was still in high school, living in that house and eating dinner at that table, and believing I knew the people around me. The filing cabinets contained 12 years of records, 12 years of deposits, withdrawals, invoices, contracts, and correspondence. And at the center of all of it, property transactions. I am a home appraiser. I read property records the way other people read newspaper headlines. I know what a deed looks like. I know what a quitclaim is. I know the difference between a clean title and a clouded one. What I was looking at in that room was a pattern, and the pattern told a story. My father and my brother Marcus, whose name appeared on the LLC registration documents, had been buying and selling distressed properties in Harlan Falls and the surrounding 3 counties for over a decade. Small parcels mostly, vacant lots, foreclosures, a few condemned structures. The kind of real estate that moves quietly, that doesn't make the news, that gets handled in county clerk's offices on Tuesday afternoons when nobody's paying attention. But the prices were wrong, consistently, methodically wrong. Properties purchased at prices well below assessed value, then resold at prices above market, the difference flowing through Hadley Creek Holdings and then into a second company, a holding company registered in Delaware in Marcus's name alone, before eventually landing in an account I had never seen. I sat on the floor of that room with my father's documents spread around me and Beau's head in my lap, and I understood, slowly and with the specific nausea of something you can't unknow, that my father and my brother had been running something that was not legal for a very long time, and that the room had been locked not to protect me from grief. It had been locked to protect them. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Tom. I photographed everything. Every document, every statement, every contract, every invoice. 347 photos. I sent them to my email in batches. Then I locked the room again as best I could with Dennis Ackley's tools, put the hasp back, and went to sit on the back porch with Beau until my hand stopped shaking. He sat next to me with his shoulder against my knee, just there, just present, not asking anything. I said out loud to no one in particular, "Okay." That was all I had. That night, I called my brother Tom. I told him I'd had the storage room opened. There was a long silence on the line. Not the kind where someone is thinking, the kind where someone is deciding. He said, "You found the files?" It wasn't a question. I said yes. He said, "I need to tell you some things, not on the phone." I said, "Come Saturday." He came Saturday. Before I tell you what Tom told me, and I need to tell you all of it because the full picture is worse than the pieces, if this story is landing somewhere inside you, hit the like button for Beau, because without him, none of this comes to light. Without that dog standing at that door every night in the dark, I never go looking. I never find anything. The room stays locked and the truth stays buried, and my family keeps moving forward on top of a lie. Like that button and keep listening. Tom sat at the kitchen table the same way he always does, chair pulled slightly away from the table, arms on his knees, looking at the floor. It's how he looks when the weight of something is on him. He told me that Hadley Creek Holdings had started when Marcus was 24 and our father was 50, that the original idea had been legitimate: buy cheap properties, renovate them, sell them at profit. A side business, a retirement supplement. But somewhere in year 2, the method changed. Marcus had a connection inside the county assessor's office, a clerk named Gary Fenton who had a gambling problem and a second mortgage and a wife who didn't know about either. For a fee that averaged around $3,000 per transaction, Gary would adjust the assessed values in the county records, temporarily, just long enough for the sale to process, so that properties could be purchased at prices that appeared to match assessment but were in fact artificially depressed. The sellers, mostly elderly people, estates being settled, families dealing with debt, never knew their properties were worth more. They took what was offered. They signed the papers. They moved on. And Hadley Creek Holdings flipped the properties at actual market value and kept the difference. For 11 years. Tom had found out 4 years ago. He'd been helping Dad sort through insurance documents after the diagnosis, and Dad had left a folder in the wrong tile. Tom had confronted him. My father, dying of pancreatic cancer, had told Tom the truth in the car on the way home from a chemo appointment. He'd asked Tom to keep quiet until after he was gone. Just until then. Just give him this. Tom had kept quiet for 4 years, and my father, in the last week of his life, had pressed that key into my palm. I sat across from my brother at the kitchen table for a long time after he finished talking. The refrigerator made its sounds. Beau's collar jingled somewhere in the hallway. "He gave me the key," I said. "I know. He wanted me to find it." Tom looked at the table. "I think so. Yes." "Why not you? You already knew." He rubbed the side of his face. "Because you're the one who would do something about it." I thought about that. I thought about my father handing me that key with his yellow fingers. I thought about the families who had sold their properties, their land, their homes, their inherited acres for less than they were worth. Old people in Harlan Falls and Bell County and Knox County who had trusted the process and been quietly cheated out of money they had needed. And I thought about my mother. "Does Mom know?" I asked. Tom looked at me then, for the first time since he'd sat down. "She handled the books," he said. There is a kind of silence that is not quiet. It has a texture. It sits on your chest. It makes the ordinary sounds of a house, the refrigerator, the clock, the dog moving in the hallway, feel very far away. I sat with that silence for a while. My mother, who worked the front desk at the family practice and knew everyone's medications and had run this house for 30 years with a competence that I had always called strength and now understood was something else. I thought about Sunday dinners. I thought about the crossword. I thought about the way she'd looked at me over her coffee cup when I'd mentioned the storage room, that flat, pale-eyed look, and said she was worried about me. She hadn't been worried about me. She'd been watching to see how much I knew. That night, I lay awake until 4 in the morning. Beau was pressed against my side, which he never does. He's a foot-of-the-bed dog. But that night, he moved himself up beside me and stayed there, warm and heavy and present, and I put my arm over him the way you hold on to the only solid thing in a tilting room. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to a real estate attorney in Lexington named Patricia Okafor, whom I'd worked with professionally and whose judgment I trusted completely. The second was to the Kentucky State Police. I won't walk you through every detail of what came next because some of it is still part of the record and some of it belongs to people whose names are not mine to use, but I will tell you the shape of it. Patricia helped me understand what I had. She went through the photographed documents and identified 6 separate categories of potential fraud: assessor manipulation, deed fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy. She said the paper trail was unusually clean, in the way that only meticulous people produce. My father and Marcus had kept everything, every transaction, every fee to Gary Fenton, every corresponding entry. Why would they keep this? She asked me. I thought about my father pressing that key into my palm. Because someone was supposed to find it, I said. The state police investigation took 8 months. I gave them everything, all 347 photographs, the laptop from the storage room, the access codes to the floor safe that Dennis Ackley helped me open on a second visit. Inside the safe were 2 additional hard drives and a handwritten ledger in my father's script that turned out to be the most complete record of the entire operation. During those 8 months, I was still living in my mother's house. For the first 2 weeks after I made the calls, she didn't know what I'd done. She knew I'd opened the room. She knew Tom had come. She knew something had shifted in the air between us. Then she found out. I do not know how she found out, whether Tom told her, whether someone at the state police contacted her, whether she simply knew her daughter well enough to read the signs. What I know is that she came home from work on a Thursday evening in March and walked past me in the kitchen without speaking and went to her room and closed the door. She didn't come out for dinner. She didn't come out at all that night. At 7 the next morning, I knocked on her door. She opened it. She was dressed for work. Her face was perfectly composed the way it always is. She said, "I need you to move out." I said, "I know. By the end of the month. I'll be gone by next weekend." She looked at me for a moment, and then she said something I have replayed many times since, not because it was cruel, but because it was the most honest thing she ever said to me, and it came at the end. She said, "He should have burned those files." Then she picked up her purse and went to work. I moved out in 8 days, me and Beau and 2 truckloads of boxes. I rented an apartment on the 2nd floor of a building on Market Street in Harlan Falls, $640 a month, 2 bedrooms, a small balcony where I put a dog bed and a folding chair. Tom helped me move. He didn't say much. When the last box was in and we were standing in the empty apartment, he said he was sorry. I told him I didn't know yet whether I believed him. He said that was fair. He drove home. My first week alone, I cried more than I had since the month my father died. Not from sadness, from something more complicated than sadness, from the specific grief of discovering that the version of your family you grew up inside was never the whole truth, that the house and the dinners and the small town life had been built partly on a foundation of other people's losses. Beau slept pressed against me every night that first week. During the days when I sat at my kitchen table trying to work and not working, he would put his head in my lap and wait. Not pushing, not performing, just present, the way good dogs are, the way the best ones always know. I started therapy in April. A woman named Dr. Angela Pruitt, whose office was on the 3rd floor of a medical building in Harlan Falls, and whose bookshelves were full of plants, and who had a way of asking questions that made you feel the answer had always been available. You just needed someone to point at it. I talked to her about my father, about the key, about what it means when the person who loved you most also lied to you longest, about whether love and betrayal can exist in the same person at the same time without one of them canceling the other out. She said they can. She said people are not arithmetic. I thought about that for a long time. In June, Marcus was arrested. He was in Nashville. The state police and federal investigators, because by that point the wire fraud component had brought in federal jurisdiction, had spent months building the case before they moved. When they did, they moved on 3 people at once: Marcus, Gary Fenton, the assessor's clerk, and a real estate attorney named Phil Wares, who had facilitated 12 of the transactions over 7 years. My mother was not arrested. She was interviewed. She was identified as a cooperating witness. The arrangement she made with prosecutors is not something I have full visibility into, and I have made my peace with not knowing. When Marcus was arrested, he called Tom. Tom called me. I was sitting on my balcony with coffee, and Beau was on his bed beside me in the morning sun, and my phone rang, and Tom said Marcus had been arrested. And I said, okay. I didn't say anything else. Tom said, Claire? I said, I need a minute. I set the phone down and looked out at Market Street below. A woman walking a stroller, a delivery truck double parked, the hardware store opening its gate, Harlan Falls moving through its morning the way it always did. Beau looked up at me from his bed. I reached over and scratched behind his ear. He closed his eyes. Good boy, I said. I want to pause here because I've been careful not to name some of the victims in this story, and I want to explain why. In the course of the investigation, the state identified 31 separate transactions that met the threshold of prosecutable fraud. 31 families or estates who had sold property in Harlan and the surrounding counties at prices that had been manipulated beneath true value. The youngest seller in the records was 44. The oldest was 91. Most of them were people who had needed the money, people settling a parent's estate, people dealing with debt, people who had trusted the county assessor's records because that is what those records are for. I thought about them when I gave my testimony in the federal proceeding, a recorded deposition, 4 hours, in a conference room in Lexington. Patricia sat beside me. I answered every question I was asked. Afterward, I sat in the parking garage in my car for a while. Beau was home. I had a voicemail from Dr. Pruitt saying she was thinking of me. I drove back to Harlan Falls on the 2-lane highway with the radio off and the window cracked and the May air warm and green-smelling, and I thought about my father in the hospital room pressing that key into my hand. I think I understand it now. I think he knew he had run out of time to fix what he'd helped build. And I believe, he knew I would be the one to unmake it. Not because he wanted me to hurt, but because he trusted me more than he trusted anyone else to do the thing that needed doing, even when it cost something. He was right about the cost. He was right about me. Marcus pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy in October, 14 months after I'd had the storage room opened. He was sentenced in January, 3 years federal, restitution ordered to be determined by a civil process that is still ongoing. Gary Fenton, the assessor's clerk, cooperated early and received 18 months, served partially in a work release program. Phil Wares, the attorney, went to trial and was convicted on 7 counts, 4 years. The Kentucky Real Estate Commission opened its own investigation and suspended the licenses of 2 additional parties whose names I learned for the first time in the proceeding. The full restitution process, identifying all 31 transactions, calculating losses, and building the civil cases, is a years-long undertaking that other people are handling. My part in it is mostly finished. My mother sits in her house on Sycamore Creek Road. She still works at the family practice. I do not know the details of her agreement with prosecutors. I have not spoken to her since the morning she told me to move out and picked up her purse and went to work. Tom has called me several times. We have talked. Not easily, not with the comfort of before, but we have talked. He is carrying his own weight from those 4 years of knowing and not acting, and I think he understands that carrying it is the right thing to do. I did not forgive him on a specific day. I don't know if I've fully forgiven him yet. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a moment. It's a direction you decide to move in and then keep moving in even when it's hard. Dr. Pruitt said that. In March of this year, 14 months after I moved into the apartment on Market Street, I bought a house. Not in Harlan Falls, 30 miles away, in a small town called Belfry, which has a creek and a library and a bakery that opens at 6 in the morning, and a street called Poplar Lane that dead ends into a patch of woods. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a covered porch, a yard that is half flat and half slope, which Beau has already decided is ideal for running. I sat at a table in the title company's office in Pikeville and signed my name 41 times, and then I held the keys in my hand. And they were two keys on a plain metal ring, and they weighed exactly what they weighed, which is to say, not much at all, and everything. I drove home to the apartment and packed the last boxes and loaded them into my car. And then I loaded Beau. He gets the back seat, has always gotten the back seat, and I drove the 30 miles to Poplar Lane. I unlocked the front door. Beau went in first. He went from room to room with his nose down and his tail up, the way he does in a new place, reading the history of the walls and the floors. He came back to the living room where I was standing with the first box still in my arms. He sat down. He looked at me with those amber eyes, and his tail went. Just his tail. Slow, steady, certain. That's the look that means, this is good. This is right. We're home. I set down the box. I sat down on the floor. He came and put his head on my knee, and I held on to him for a while in the empty living room of a house that was mine. No locked doors. No keys I'd been carrying for years without understanding why. No sounds in the night I couldn't explain. Just a house and a dog and enough quiet to finally hear myself think. If someone had told me when I moved back to Harlan Falls, tired, grieving, just a woman and her lad moving into her mother's spare room, that 2 years later, everything I thought I knew about my family would be evidence in a federal proceeding, I would not have believed them. I would not have had room for it. Grief takes up all the available space. But Beau knew. I don't know how. I don't know what animals perceive that we don't. I don't know if he smelled something in that room, the paper, the ink, the particular chemistry of secrets kept too long, or whether he simply sensed something off in the air of that house, in the pattern of our evenings, in the way adults avoided certain doors. What I know is that he stood at that door every night and made that sound until I listened. And when I listened, everything that needed to come to light came to light. That is the whole story, or most of it. The civil restitution work continues. The families who sold their property, those 31 transactions, are part of a process that is still moving through the courts. I hope it ends in something real for them. I believe it will. My part is done. And if there is a version of my father who can see any of this, I want to believe he is at peace with what happened, that he pressed that key into my palm because he had run out of time to make it right himself, and he trusted me with the weight of it. He was not a simple person. He was not a villain and not a hero. He was a man who made choices, and who, at the end, made one more choice, to leave a door and a key and a daughter who knew how to open things. I still have the key. It's on my ring, between my car key and my house key on Poplar Lane. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it's the last thing his hands made an impression on. Maybe because some objects are too heavy with meaning to set down. Maybe I'll set it down someday. Not yet. Beau is 5 years old now. He runs that sloped backyard on Poplar Lane like he owns the entire county. He sleeps at the foot of the bed every night, which is where he belongs, which is where he has always belonged. He has not barked at any doors since we left Sycamore Creek Road. Some nights I wake up at 2 in the morning out of old habit and I listen. The house is quiet. The creek makes its sound through the window I leave cracked. Beau shifts at the foot of the bed and goes still again. Nothing to find, nothing hidden, no locked room at the end of the hall. Just a house where everything is what it appears to be. That is not a small thing. I didn't know it was rare until I'd lived inside the alternative. I'm 31 years old. I own a house on Poplar Lane. I have a job I'm good at and a therapist I trust and a dog who once stood in the dark for an hour and 40 minutes to show me where the truth was. That's enough. That is genuinely, completely enough. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. I know it was a lot. These things always are. If you've ever had an animal show you something no one else believed, if you've ever been told you were imagining it, that you were dramatic, that you needed to calm down, that the dog was just a dog, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. I mean that. Stories like this one deserve to be heard out loud, not carried alone. That's what Pet Witness is for. If you're not subscribed yet, please subscribe and share this with someone who needs to know that sometimes the animal in your life is the only one telling you the truth. I'll see you in the next one.